Right.
Our present flag, very matter-of-factly, despite, as we said the other day, the thrilling backstory of its heroic designer, Albert Markham, with a cutlass in one hand and a pistol in the other, fighting off pirates in the South Seas.
I didn't know about that, but right. Okay.
But for the new flag, Kyle Lockwood gets the chance to talk about Aotearoa growing upwards. We are one people, peaceful, embracing the multiculture. A point made in a short thought here from Raywin Brockway.
For the Lockwood design, there's a lot of highly positive words and imagery, such as icon, proudly, peaceful, multicultural, one people. I feel that this isn't even-handed. Should this be allowed? Are there any rules around what sort of material can be included with voting papers?
Well, Albert's not around to describe his flag anymore. The question for you, though, is do you think we have had an even playing field, or has the presentation implied, bright new dawn versus dowdy old colony?
I think it has, because the aim of the process to me was change the flag, and I think it's all been couched in those terms. I think the Prime Minister wearing it constantly on his person, etc., has been something that is promoting the change, but I haven't, it hasn't swayed me in any way. I've just looked at it and gone, I feel a bit sorry for Mr. Lockwood, actually, because a lot of people are outpouring about how much they hate the look of it, but I just hate the look of it. Sorry, Mr. Lockwood.
Look, can I make one point? One good thing that's coming out of this is it's looking like we're going to get a decent turnout.
Yes.
So people are at least engaged, and I would encourage, whether you hate the flags or love them, at least have your say. It really does annoy me to see plummeting turnouts in local body elections, less than 40% in Auckland last local body elections. But this one is at least engaging people, so have a go.
Yeah, I didn't vote in the first one because I hated all of the options, so I thought I don't care which one comes out, but I'll definitely be voting in the second one.
You don't get 2 votes this time because you didn't vote in the first one, you know that?
Yes, I do know that. And somebody was putting on Facebook they're not going to vote at all, and that bothered me because I just watched Suffragette, and I was like, spoken like a man who's never had to fight for the vote. So get out there and vote.
News through this morning that cold turkey is the best way to stop smoking. A study in the Annals of Internal Medicine says you're 25% more likely to remain abstinent than smokers who try and gradually wean themselves off instead.
Well, it seems definitely the case. I've never smoked. My partner did quit when we got together because that was kind of I was like, I don't want to go out with a smoker. And he wanted to quit too, though. But it certainly seems to be that way for AA, doesn't it? If you go to AA, you have to stop, cold turkey, that's it, I know quite a few people in AA and that works really well for them. And cutting down gradually on booze is not really that easily done, so I think the same could be said.
Makes sense to you too?
Cigarette.
It does. I wish I gave up smoking, I think, nearly just a decade ago. I was a heavy smoker. But I took up those nicotine chewing gum.
Yep.
And that was just as hard to kick.
Right.
And I wish I'd just gone I'm now totally free of both cigarettes and the gum, but I wish I'd just gone cold turkey in the first instance. Yep, do it. It's worth it.
What about, as in Australia, the government making cigarettes cost $40 a packet, as they have an idea to do?
$40 a packet? Wowzers. It's funny because I am all for that for cigarettes, but I'm not for booze. Don't put the price of booze up massively like that. But that is, wow, that's a lot of money.
Can I ask you one thing before we go? I mean, 1 in 2, 1 in 3 of us, depending on which Western country we live in, will get a form of cancer at some stage in our lives, in a long lifetime. So is the attack on smokers completely logical? I mean, we're trying to make the human race healthier, which is praiseworthy. Is it also a kind of denial in a way we will all die of something?
I was amazed at the material you sent out, Jim, because it seems to demonstrate that despite the falling off in smoking, lung cancer is increasing. Now, that may be just because we're living longer, I don't know.
I would say, no, having lots of people that have died recently that are in their late 60s and 70s in my family, no, I think it's good. That if they can live another 10 years to see their grandchildren go to high school or something, then it's worth it.
A conversation we will continue another day. But it's been a series of great conversations today. Mike Williams, very good to have you back on the panel.
Thank you.
And Penny Ashton, you too, and good luck for the wedding.
Thanks. Yay.
Thanks, everybody. And John Campbell is along shortly with Checkpoint.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. On behalf of the Checkpoint team, Thank you for joining us. Tonight, Trump and Clinton both have good days. Rubio has a disastrous day. Is the writing on the wall? We go live to the US throughout the program tonight. We're back with Bunnings. Yesterday, suspension notices for taking off your apron. Today, community groups doing stock takes as fundraisers where the amount paid is less than the minimum wage. The so-called jihadi brides, remember them? Well, we've gone to the difficult task of getting information on who they were and where they were really from. The gun inquiry and the Black Caps take the adage, when in Rome, and apply it brilliantly on a dead, flat track in Nagpur. All that and more in the next 90 minutes. But first, Leilani Mamoisia with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. Parliament's agreed to hold an inquiry into the illegal possession of firearms. The decision by the Law and Order Select Committee was unanimous. The Police Minister, Judith Collins, earlier called for the inquiry, saying there needed to be a focus on how weapons were getting into the hands of criminals and gangs. But one committee member, the Green Party's David Clendon, says the draft terms of reference create a wider scope of investigation.
This is not just about gangs. Certainly they are part of the problem, part of the equation, but many of the major gun-related tragedies in New Zealand have had nothing to do with gangs. So it is important that we look at the whole issue of illegal possession, be it criminals, gangs, or simply people who have guns who ought not to.
Green MP David Clendon. Business leaders are going along with plans to axe special favours over greenhouse gas emissions, even though it will push up costs. The government has confirmed a special 50% discount on climate change obligations for New Zealand citizens and companies will be scrapped. This so-called 1 for 2 scheme was introduced at the depth of the global financial crisis to minimise the economic impact of fighting climate change, but it's now going to be axed. The Chief Executive of the Employers and Manufacturers Association, John Campbell, says the cost of this will have to be shared by everyone, and he says others are already doing this.
When the emissions trading scheme was introduced, the rule was damage the environment and you'll pay for it in full. But the National-led government decided that was way too expensive when the global financial crisis hit, so it
regardless of what the government says, the world has actually got it. Travel anywhere, they're recycling, they're insulating their homes, they're buying LED bulbs, they're buying electric cars anyway, because frankly, the world doesn't want to choke to death.
And that was John Campbell from the Employers and Manufacturers Association. Donald Trump, the frontrunner in the race to be the Republican candidate for United States President, is winning Florida, Illinois and North Carolina in the 5-state ballots today. His Florida victory has forced local Senator Marco Rubio out of the race. Mr. Trump lost in Ohio to the state governor there, John Campbell, and votes are still being counted in Missouri, where Mr. Trump is neck and neck with Texas Senator Ted Cruz. The New York billionaire was upbeat in his victory speech in Florida.
And I'm just very proud to be a part of this. We're going to do a lot of trips over the next month, but I think we're going to have a great victory. And I think more importantly than anything else, we are going to start winning again. This country is going to start winning again. We don't win anymore.
Donald Trump. In the battle for the Democratic Party's nomination, Hillary Clinton has comfortable wins over the Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders in Florida, Ohio and North Carolina. Housing New Zealand says there's a feeling of disappointment and outrage that some tenants of a new Christchurch development have contaminated their homes with methamphetamine. The new housing development of 19 homes was completed in June last year, and 2 tenants have already been evicted due to contamination by the drug also known as P. Housing New Zealand's Chief Operating Officer, Paul Commons, says about 400 of its properties around the country are uninhabitable because of P contamination and in various stages of testing and remediation.
People can't respect the house and their own health and the health of their family in these homes. There's other families that need to be housed. There's other people in need. We will house those who will look after themselves and look after the home.
Paul Commons says $5.8 million has been spent on the problem in the past 6 months. The government is proposing law changes it says will allow local councils to share services across regions and provinces and deliver cost savings to ratepayers. The changes will also allow for greater use of council-controlled organisations. The local government minister, Sam Lotuinga, says current laws restrict the ability of New Zealand's 78 councils and 66 water authorities to work together to provide services. Mr Lotuinga says the changes will lead to greater collaboration.
It could be sharing expertise alongside other councils. It's about sharing, maybe IT platforms, expertise of inspectors, engineers. Those are the sorts of, sharing of services that I think is going to become important.
Mr Lotuinga says the costs of local services are rising faster than council revenues, so councils need new ways to manage finances and be more efficient. Into sports news now, the Hurricanes and All Black winger Nehe Milner-Skudder is out for the rest of the Super Rugby season due to a shoulder injury. Milner-Skudder needs surgery on the shoulder he dislocated playing against the Blues last weekend. It means he'll also miss the All Blacks Test series against Wales in June. All Black hooker Dane Coles, though, will finally play his first game of the season for the Hurricanes, having recovered from a calf injury to take his place in the side for Friday night's match against the Western Force in Palmerston North. The Black Caps spinner Mitchell Santner says their victory over India at the 2020 World Cup was harder fought than the scoreboard suggests. New Zealand beat the hosts and tournament favourites India in Nagpur by 47 runs. Batting first, the Black Caps made 126 for 7 in their 20 overs and then dismissed India for 79, with Santner taking 4 wickets for 11 runs.
We knew it was going to be a hard-fought game. I mean, the score might show it was a little bit not like that, but it definitely was. We had to fight to get to 120. We thought that was maybe a little bit below par, but then we came out. We stuck to our plans really well and managed to keep getting wickets at crucial times. But it was definitely a bit hard fought than it looked.
New Zealand play Australia in their next match on Friday night. The New Zealand women's team also enjoyed a first-up win with a 7-wicket win over Sri Lanka. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Myanmar. Now it has its first democratic government in 50 years. How's that hopey, changey stuff working out for the country's Rohingya Muslim minority, who 18 months ago were in concentration-style camps? Matthew Smith has the latest, and Peggy Raval reports from Alberta, Canada, where the locals are having to deal with an oil industry downturn and a Prime Minister committed to action on climate change. On Nights after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
In the Met Service weather till midnight tomorrow, Northland fine spells and showers, some heavy during the afternoons. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula showers, some heavy. Gisborne to Wairarapa, occasional showers easing tomorrow evening. Waikato, Waitomo and Bay of Plenty, scattered showers with possible thunderstorms. Cloudy tomorrow with isolated showers. Taranaki to Manawatu, including the central high country, occasional rain tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington, showers clearing from Wellington tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Northern Westland, rain clearing this evening, but the odd shower lingering about the Kaikoura coast until the morning. Southern Westland and Fiordland is fine. Canterbury, drizzle clearing today but remaining cloudy, fine tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, cloud clearing and becoming fine. Chatham Islands, rain easing to showers late afternoon and clearing overnight. And I'll be back at 5:30 with headlines. It's now 5:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Leilani. Bunnings coming up next. Community groups who do work in their warehouse, for example, earning less than the minimum wage. It's a fundraiser, but is that appropriate? We're going to ask, but we begin tonight with what appears to have been a defining day in the US presidential primaries on the right, and it's an anti-establishment right that appears now to be resolute in that position. Donald Trump beat Marco Rubio in Rubio's own state, Florida. Mr. Rubio was touted as the kind of Republican candidate that could appeal in the centre. Remember, Trump's winning Republican primaries on the right. But to be president, a broader appeal may well be required. Mr. Rubio, the Florida senator who couldn't actually win Florida, was faced with a brutal reality. Carrying on was suddenly pointless.
While it is not God's plan that I be president in 2016 or maybe ever, and while today my campaign is suspended, the fact that I've even come this far is evidence of how special America truly is. And all the reason more why we must do all we can to ensure that this nation remains a special place. I ask the American people, do not give in to the fear. Do not give in to the frustration. We can disagree about public policy. We can disagree about it vibrantly, passionately. But we are a hopeful people, and we have every right to be hopeful. Thank you, and God bless you all. Thank you very much.
Marco Rubio effectively pulling out. He lost, of course, to Donald Trump in Florida after a week in which protests in Chicago and Kansas City appeared to rattle him. Mr. Trump's status as the outsider candidate who appeals to the anger and alienation of people who are deeply mistrustful of the political establishment appears to have been strengthened. Taking Florida was a big victory for Trump, and he enjoyed it.
To win the states that we won and to win by the margins, and especially, look, this is my second home, Florida. To win by that kind of a number is incredible. It's record setting. And I have to say it that number one, I want to congratulate Marco Rubio on having run a really tough campaign. He's tough, he's smart, and he's got a great future. He's got a great future. But I have to say, and nobody has ever in the history of politics received the kind of negative advertising that I have. Record. By the way, mostly false. I wouldn't say 100%, but about 90%. Mostly false, vicious, horrible. They say it was 18 million the first week, meaning last week, and 25 million. It added up to over $40 million. And you explain it to me because I can't. My numbers went up.
Donald Trump, more on him in a moment. Florida was one of 5 states decided on what was Super Tuesday 3. Trump lost the other winner-takes-all state, Ohio, to John Kasich. Kasich is a distant third, though, in the Republican race, and he was 4th until Rubio pulled out. On the Democrat side, Hillary Clinton won Florida, Ohio and North Carolina, giving her what appears on the face of it to be an almost insurmountable lead over her rival, Bernie Sanders.
This is another Super Tuesday for our campaign. Thank you, Florida. Thank you, North Carolina. Thank you, Ohio. We are moving closer to securing the Democratic Party nomination and winning this election in November. You know, because of all of you and our supporters across the country, our campaign has earned more votes than any other candidate, Democrat or Republican. And I want to congratulate Senator Sanders for the vigorous campaign he's waging. Now today, all of you in the states where contests were held voted to break down the barriers that hold us all back so every one of us can share in the promise of America.
Hillary Clinton, who had a really good day. More on her later in the program. But let's go live to our correspondent in Florida now, where Trump was triumphant over Rubio. Steve Moore joins us now live. Steve, there's a bit of a delay, so I'm just going to ask you the big question and let you answer it, really. Is Trump set? Is this the Republican nomination for him now?
Well, you know, on the face of it, it certainly seems so. It was, as you mentioned, a pretty dismal performance for Marco Rubio. He's the home state senator here in Florida. He's been the senator in this state since 2010, when he got into power on a wave of Tea Party support. He lost heavily, and we'd expected that. He'd been 20 plus points down in the polls here in Florida over recent weeks, and certainly Donald Trump's scale of Donald Trump's victory here in Florida tonight really seemed to bear that out. Now, whether or not Donald Trump can guarantee that he will be the nominee for the Republican Party, to use a cliche, really kind of actually remains to be seen. In terms of actual delegates, he is far ahead at the moment. But if you look at a couple of things, there may be a route for the Republican leadership, or the Republican establishment, as many refer to them, to see another candidate gain the nomination. And the way that works is if it comes to the convention later this year, where the nominee is officially chosen, if Kasich and Cruz together have more delegates than Donald Trump, and Donald Trump has not yet reached the 1,237 delegates that he needs in order to guarantee the nomination, then you may have what's called a brokered convention here. And at that point, all bets are off, as you would say. What it means is that the delegates are up for grabs. It means that they could go either way, and at that point you could have a nominee other than Donald Trump. That is very unlikely. It seems that Donald Trump, based on the scale of his wins and the polling in states to come, does have an avenue to 1,237 delegates. Neither John Kasich nor Ted Cruz has that. So at the moment, it looks like pretty much a foregone conclusion. But if you look at Ohio and the win that John Kasich scored there and all the delegates that he gets, you know, that could be a speed bump, if not a roadblock to Donald Trump. But at the moment, it seems like the wind is behind Donald Trump's back.
Why is the wind behind his back, Steve? Because the rest of the world, well, much of the rest of the world is looking bewildered at this. There's a great editorial that's just come out in The Nation this afternoon saying we have to take this man seriously. We can't reduce the American primaries to a circus. In other words, there has to be a concentration on more than just his irrationality on the stage, on more than just the protests. We have to drill down into his policies, what he stands for. But are the people who support him worried about that, or do they just like the fact he stands against the current order?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it, as you mentioned there. You know, over the last few weeks, I've been to several of these candidate rallies, these big rallies, and what you hear over and over and over again is they like Donald Trump because he's not a politician. They like Donald Trump because he tells it the way it is. When he says something that's politically incorrect, you know, they say that's Donald Trump telling it the way it is. And that's what people like. They're very, very fed up with the establishment, what they see as the status quo. Now, why are they fed up with that? Why is it that there's such vitriolic opposition to the sort of establishment, if you like, this time around? Well, many analysts point to the GOP, the Republican Party themselves, saying they've sown the seeds since President Obama came into power for that anger. Since President Obama came into power, really the opposition in Congress has been just monumental to President Obama's agenda. There's been this sort of aim to stop his policies at all costs. And that sort of anger, the reason that people are feeling bad about government is, according to many people, they've been told to feel bad about the government for many, many years. And now, this time around, as the election nears, you know, maybe their chickens are coming home to roost, according to some analysts that I've heard. And Donald Trump is sort of the manifestation of that. He is sort of embodying that anger. He's giving people permission to be angry. He's giving people permission to be politically incorrect. And that's sort of what's propelling him to the success in the polls, even as the rest of the world watches and scratches its head.
Steve, I know you're following the Trump campaign there and you're in Florida behind Trump, but can we just talk briefly about Hillary Clinton? We're going to discuss her with the Guardian correspondent later on, but she had a really good day. Is she now set as the Democratic nominee?
Certainly looks like it, both in terms of elected delegates, but also in terms of superdelegates as well. The Democratic Party has this superdelegate system, which was put into place, if you like, by the party elders to ensure that somebody who is electable gets picked as the nominee. And Hillary Clinton has the lion's share of those superdelegates as well. So really, with tonight's victories, it gives her a formidable lead over Bernie Sanders. It's very difficult to see how Sanders comes back from this and gets enough delegates to surpass Hillary Hillary Clinton, but we did see it in 2008 when Barack Obama got the nomination. Most of those superdelegates were behind Hillary Clinton initially, and as Barack Obama scored more and more successes in the primaries, we saw them gradually drift over and switch towards Hillary Clinton as he appeared to be more electable. That doesn't seem to be happening this time. Having said that, we're still waiting for results to come in from Missouri. Very, very close there at the moment, neck and neck within a 0.3 percentage points. I think I saw at the last check. It may be a bit different now. But that certainly looks like it could go Bernie Sanders' way. A bit too early to tell. But even if he does manage to pull that off, it's going to be a steep challenge for him to surpass Hillary Clinton.
Steve Mortlow from Florida. Thanks so much, Steve. We appreciate it. And later we'll be talking to a Guardian correspondent covering the election. That'll be after 6 o'clock. Let's head home now. Concerns have been raised about Bunnings' use of volunteers to run their stock take. Now, Bunnings pays community groups $12.50 per person per hour to work an evening shift in its warehouse counting stock. That's almost $2 less than the current minimum wage. It comes a day after some Bunnings workers were served suspension notices for taking off their aprons as a minor form of protest over rostering issues. Bunnings says volunteering for stock takes is a fundraising opportunity, but a top employment lawyer says it's legally foggy. Alex Ashton reports.
In March last year, a Bunnings warehouse in Wellington put out a letter to community groups asking for help with its 6 monthly stock take. The company offered them $12.50 an hour for each person who signed up, payment worded as a donation, not a wage. The volunteers would start at 4 p.m. and work into the night, and they all had to be over 18. One of those who received the invitation was Louise Blair. She says the offer gave Bunnings cheap labour and let it flout employment rules.
So they were able to claim the glory for giving a donation to a local community group, but at the same time sidestepping ACC levies, taxes, holiday liabilities, and any of the things that go with having an employee do that work.
Employment lawyer Peter Cullen says at first glance it seems Bunnings is being crafty in order to pay people less. But he says on further inspection, it's unclear whether the practice is legal or not.
There's no intention to create legal relations with the workers, but rather with, let's say, the sports club. The second point is that there's no direct payment to the workers, and generally there's probably no expectation from them that they'd be paid.
Peter Cullen says the terms of the agreement suggest the workers are indeed volunteers and not just poorly paid workers. But he says it's foggy enough to challenge in court, and the practice does swing in Bunnings' favour.
Overall, they're probably getting good PR, and in the main getting workers who'd normally get a hell of a lot more, rather than the sort of work you'd get if you paid them the minimum wage. So I think it's a benefit for the Bunnings or whoever does it, and workers who normally work there would feel that people are being brought in to undercut them.
Checkpoint asked Bunnings if they saved money by having volunteers run the stock take over staff members, and if paid employees were offered the work first. It didn't answer those questions, but its general manager, Jackie Coombs, says their preference is to use its own staff for stock take. She also reiterates that the system is entirely voluntary. The Chief Executive Officer of Fundraising New Zealand, James Austin, says there's no shortage of community groups trying to earn a buck, and, in theory, he's glad to see corporates helping them out. But he echoes the concerns of Peter Cullen.
I would hope, though, that in any organisation that's offering this type of service to charities, that they're not saving money by doing so, that the amount of money they would normally spend in producing that outcome that they're looking for would be equal to what they'd have to pay commercially.
Louise Blair says Bunnings employees would probably appreciate the overtime.
I'm not a lawyer, I don't know if it's illegal, but I don't think it sounds fair and equitable when the minimum wage is $14.75 and you're asking parents to do that to help their children.
She says Bunnings get to fly the flag of community spirit, but their focus seems purely on profit. For Checkpoint, Alex Ashton.
So what did Bunnings General Manager Jackie Coombs say about that? Well, she was off-site and couldn't be interviewed today, even by phone. We asked her to comment on the industrial action of some of its employees yesterday, as we reported. And as we mentioned at the time, the company served some staff suspension notices after taking off their work aprons during their shift. Bunnings has been in negotiation with First Union, which covers about a quarter of its staff, since July of last year. The main issue is around the company's power to impose or change rosters without consultation. But in a statement, Ms Coombs says the proposal still offers staff members 2 weeks' notice of their next month's roster. Ms Coombs says all employees can appeal roster changes and all staff receive an annual pay increase. Coming up next, the jihadi brides Who were they really? Plus, Parliament will hold an inquiry into the illegal possession of firearms. And later in the show, beer for breakfast, anyone? The breakfast survey that might turn your stomach instead of kick-starting your system. We love your feedback and you know how to do it. But just a reminder, text 2101, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz and Facebook and Twitter are Checkpoint Radio NZ. He says blankly, thinking, try to remember. It's tragic, I only say it every night. It's 5:25 on Checkpoint. The Security Intelligence Service has revealed none of the so-called jihadi brides who became headline news last year actually left from New Zealand. An Official Information Act request by Checkpoint has revealed all were New Zealand citizens who were living in Australia and that they left from there. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, has more.
Last December, the director of the SIS, Rebecca Kitteridge, told Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee there was a developing trend of New Zealand women travelling to ISIS-controlled areas.
Something that's changed over the last year is that the issue of New Zealand women going to travelling to Iraq and Syria was something that we hadn't seen previously or been aware of previously that had happened. It's difficult to see what they do when they go. We definitely have intelligence that they went. Whether they are going to fight or whether they're going to support other fighters is not clear.
Now the SIS has clarified the status of those women, saying not one of them left from New Zealand, although they were New Zealand passport holders. The Labour leader Andrew Little, who sits on the committee, says his impression was that these were people who were resident in New Zealand and had left from here. And he says the issue was first raised in the context of the risk of other New Zealanders becoming jihadi brides.
The threat of people here being kind of seduced into the apparent glamour of going off and fighting jihad in Syria and wherever else, and that impressionable people may think that this is an attractive thing to do. That's what I recall the nature of the discussion being, and therefore this was a security concern that our security agencies had to be across.
The Minister in charge of the Security Intelligence Service, Chris Finlayson, denies the government deliberately created the wrong impression.
If you go back to the statements that were made, there were no implications or winks and nods that they were not resident in New Zealand. We were very clear about the position.
But Andrew Little says the government did nothing to correct the impression the women were leaving from New Zealand.
If the government knew at that time or shortly after that none of these people were actually resident in New Zealand before they'd gone to Syria, then they have deliberately, and I would say calculatingly, created an impression that simply wasn't correct, and that is that there was this security risk that didn't exist.
A view rejected by Chris Finlayson.
I don't know, we didn't give that impression at all. That's simply mistaken. It's wrong.
So you don't think the New
No, I
Zealand
don't think that at all.
The SIS refused to provide any further information about the number of women, whether they were married before they left Australia, how many had returned to New Zealand and how many may have been on the government's watch list, citing national security. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Let's stay in Parliament. A Parliamentary Select Committee will hold an inquiry into the illegal possession of firearms. Police Minister Judith Collins earlier called for an investigation, saying there needs to be a focus on how weapons were getting into the hands of criminals and gangs. Here's our political reporter, May Heron.
It was a unanimous decision across all of the parties represented on the Law and Order Select Committee to investigate how people are able to access illegal firearms. The Labour Party had wanted an independent inquiry, but its police spokesperson, Stuart Nash, says he's pleased with today's outcome.
We had unanimous support from every single party in the Select Committee. We think the way forward is actually to work together on this because there is no politics in police safety. We think we've got it about right.
The initial draft terms of reference will allow the committee to investigate how many criminals own guns, how many of them are illegal, as well as whether police are able to enforce the current law and if they are recovering enough stolen firearms. The inquiry also intends to look at how well Customs is managing the border. The Green Party MP, David Clendon, who is on the committee, says it will go beyond looking at criminals.
This is not just about gangs. Certainly they are part of the problem, but many of the major gun-related tragedies in New Zealand have had nothing to do with gangs. So it is important that we look at the whole issue of illegal possession, be it criminals, gangs, or simply people who have guns who ought not to, possibly with no criminal intent. But we really need to get control of the availability of firearms.
Mr Clendon says he doesn't think the inquiry's scope is too broad.
The problem at the moment that the police particularly have identified is that there are too many weapons popping up in the wrong hands. And so I think we're fairly tightly focused on understanding what is the scale of the problem.
Committee member and New Zealand First MP Ron Mark says it's important the inquiry doesn't just canvass points that have already been investigated.
We have gone through firearms reviews and legislation reviews time and time again in New Zealand. The question needs to be how practically, how physically, what are the processes that they are using to subvert the law and get guns into the hands of gangsters and criminals, and what then do we have to do to stop that?
The Police Minister, Judith Collins, has been calling for an inquiry into gun laws, particularly in the wake of the shooting of 4 police officers in Kawerau last week. She says this is a positive move.
It's sometimes hard to get cross-party support for all sorts of things, particularly around guns, so really good if we can do it. So I'm looking to the positive of it.
Ms Collins says once she looks at the terms of reference, she'll decide whether or not the committee inquiry will be sufficient or whether the government should consider an alternative as well. From Parliament for Checkpoint, May Heron.
5:30 is the time. Leilani has wandered into the studio with the 5:30 headlines. She'll be bringing them to us in about a minute and a half. But just before we go to them, a report from Norway where mass killer Anders Breivik made the Nazi salute in court on the first day of his lawsuit against the state, arguing his solitary confinement defies European human rights. This report from Mana Ravi from Reuters.
Shortly after they removed his handcuffs at the start of his court case, Norwegian mass murderer Anders Behring Breivik made the Nazi salute. The militant right-winger is serving a 21-year sentence in solitary confinement for massacring 77 people in 2011. But now he's suing the government from jail, saying his isolation in prison is in breach of the European Convention of Human Rights. His lawyer Øystein Storvik made opening remarks.
Many think that this is a case that has been raised so that Breivik can return to the public eye and come with an explanation. But it is simply a case about his incarceration for the rest of his life. And that, in my opinion, is important to establish.
Breivik's killing spree was unprecedented in Norway. He set off a car bomb in central Oslo, killing 8 and injuring more than 200 others. He then drove to a youth camp on a lake island and methodically shot dead 69 people, wounding 33 others, many of his victims just teenagers. Breivik said he was trying to protect Norway from Muslim immigration and multiculturalism, but he was tried and received the maximum sentence. His suit argues he should be allowed more visitors, more open correspondence, internet access, and even a family life. The government says there's no evidence the isolation is having a toll on Breivik, who's studying international relations at Oslo University from jail. There's no jury in this trial. A judge's verdict is expected in the coming weeks.
The report from Reuters coming up after the news with Leilani, well, the news headlines anyway. We're going to look at the Reserve Bank talking about dairy debt, about $45 billion in total in New Zealand. Can the country handle it? The government and emissions and dock tracks are some about to be scrapped. But here is Leilani with the headlines.
Parliament's agreed to hold an inquiry into the illegal possession of firearms. The decision by the Law and Order Select Committee was unanimous. The Police Minister earlier called for an inquiry focusing on how weapons are getting into the hands of criminals and gangs. But one committee member, the Green Party's David Clendon, says the draft terms of reference create a wider scope of investigation. Donald Trump, the frontrunner in the race to be the Republican candidate for United States President, has taken Florida, Illinois and North Carolina in the 5-state ballots today. Mr. Trump lost in Ohio to the state governor, John Kasich, and votes are still being counted in Missouri, where the vote looks to be close. Business leaders are going along with plans to axe special favours over greenhouse gas emissions, even though it will push up costs. The Chief Executive of the Employers and Manufacturers Association, John Campbell, says the costs will have to be shared by everyone. Housing New Zealand says about 400 of its properties are uninhabitable because of P contamination and are in various stages of testing and remediation. It says $5.8 million has been spent on the problem in the past 6 months. The government's proposing law changes it says will allow local councils to share services across regions and provinces and deliver cost savings to ratepayers. The changes will also allow for greater use of council-controlled organisations. Concerns have been raised about Bunnings' use of volunteers to run their stock takes at $2 less than the minimum wage. Bunnings pays community groups $12.50 per person per hour to work an evening shift in its warehouse counting stock. And it's 25 to 6.
Thank you very much, Leilani. See you with the news in 25 minutes. Let's turn to business news now. And the Reserve Bank says the country's banks can withstand a severe downturn in the dairy sector. It put the 5 biggest dairy lenders under the spotlight to test how they would cope with sustained low milk prices and also sharp falls in land values. That resulted in banks' losses of up to 8% or about $3 billion on the $38 billion in total dairy loans. Don't forget, Fonterra owes about $7 billion over and above that. But the central bank says the lenders could comfortably cope with their loans to farmers. Our economics correspondent Patrick O'Mara joins us now from the Wellington newsroom. Welcome, Patrick. How tough were these tests by the Reserve Bank?
Well, John, these were stress tests, so they are supposed to be intentionally severe. And so they were looking to see how these banks would cope with sustained low milk prices and a sharp fall in land prices. Now, it tested 2 scenarios. Under the first one, they were assuming that the dairy payout would remain below $5.25 a kilo of milk solids until the 2018-2019 season. So we're talking 3 seasons of low prices and land prices falling 20%. Under the second and the tougher scenario, they were looking at prices starting off at $3 a kilo in the current season that we're in. Remember, Fonterra are saying it's $3.90. And not getting to $5 until the 2018-2019 season, and land prices falling 40%. Now, under that worst case scenario, the bank write-offs would total about 25% of those total dairy lending, so that's about $9.5 billion, and actual losses would actually be around $3 billion. Now, the RBNZ says the banks can cope with that. And that absorb that mainly through lower earnings rather than eating into their capital.
OK, Patrick, so what are we to conclude from this? Is it all rosy for banks, even allowing for that worst possible scenario?
Well, I talked to the Bankers Association and they're saying, look, it shows we're well funded, we're resilient, and that they are committed to their farmers and will continue to do so. Because remember, this is actually about the banks themselves. This is what the Reserve Bank's interested in, not necessarily the farmers. And we know, as you have talked to them, they are hurting.
Yeah.
Now, look, but if you look at just some of these scenarios and where dairy prices are now, Fonterra's cut to $3.90. Next season's payout is looking to be around $4.50. So it does put it almost very uncomfortably close to that first scenario, at least in the initial stages. So one thing to be wary of there. The second thing is that the Reserve Bank does point out what happens if they are left with a high number of farms on their books from farmers that have gone under, and they can't sell them because there's not enough buyers out there. Now that would certainly increase the uncertainty around the scale of the eventual write-downs, and they may actually have to raise more money to make sure that their confidence remains out there. And I think another thing about these stress tests as well is that these are only first order effects. They're only looking at the relationship between the farm and the bank. They're not looking at what happens, secondary effects in the wider community. Farmers spending in local shops, for example, buying fertiliser, maintenance, rural supplies. And of course, those people are also customers of banks too. So, we need to also think about what that may mean.
Thanks, Patrick. Can you just tell us about the markets while you're there, while we've got you?
Yeah, I certainly can. I'm filling in for 2 jobs these days. The NZX 50 index, and look, that declined 15 points to 6563. The market relatively unmoved by a current account deficit, which narrowed slightly.
Yeah.
Look, the dollar trading at around 66 US and 88.45 Australian. Look, more news in the numbers again tomorrow morning on Morning Report.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Patrick O'Mara, our economics correspondent, doubling as a business correspondent also tonight. The government move to toughen up on climate-damaging emissions may mean, according to some, that goods and services in some respects could get more expensive. The Climate Change Minister, Paula Bennett, today announced she'll scrap a deal which allowed some sectors to pay for half of their pollution. Eric Frickberg reports.
When the emissions trading scheme was introduced, the rule was damage the environment and you'll pay for it in full. But the National-led government decided that was way too expensive when the global financial crisis hit, so it cut people's obligations to pay for their pollution in half. Now that same government wants to restore that back to 100%. Unexpectedly, Kim Campbell of the Employers and Manufacturers Association is pleased about it.
The fact is the previous carbon program was a failure, it didn't work, so it has to be replaced with something, and now that we have a minister that's prepared to go to work on it, that's a good thing.
Under the system, companies like petrol firms that emit greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide buy credits from forestry companies whose trees absorb carbon dioxide as they grow. But they only had to pay for half their obligations. In future, they'll have to pay for them all. That would normally be an imposition on energy firms like Shell, but its New Zealand head, Rob Jager, says he's not worried.
Shell supports a well-functioning global emissions trading scheme, so we have no issue with removing of the 2-for-1.
These comments follow Paula Bennett's definitive remarks this morning that paying for half your emissions and being excused for them all is an alibi that's coming to an end.
This isn't really a case of if we remove 1 for 2, but more when and how. It was always a temporary measure.
This change will push up prices, especially of goods with a large energy component. John Carnegie, who handles energy for Business New Zealand, says it's hard to be precise about how big those price rises will be, but he gives 2 estimates.
We had one power company saying that a $25 a tonne price of carbon would increase the price of power by 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's on a base of delivered energy of about 23 cents, so a non-trivial increase.
His other example is a couple of cents on a litre of petrol. Again, not trivial. Despite that, his organisation supports the change. Kim Campbell says in the end the costs will be borne by everyone, and by doing this, New Zealand is merely matching other people's efforts to keep the planet habitable.
Regardless of what the government says, the world has actually got it. Travel anywhere, they're recycling, they're insulating their homes, they're buying LED bulbs, they're buying electric cars anyway, because frankly, the world doesn't want to choke to death.
The Green Party leader James Shaw welcomes the move but says more is needed.
This by itself is not going to lead to substantial decreases in our greenhouse gas emissions. It is the first of many subsidies that needs to go, but it is a welcome first step.
The exact date for axing the 50% concession is yet to be determined. For Checkpoint, Eric Frickberg.
Tramping groups fear a Department of Conservation tracks and huts review could mean some routes are closed or left to third parties to maintain. DOC is revisiting a 2004 audit of its conservation estate with an eye to getting the best bang for its $350 million budget. Our Taranaki reporter Robin Martin has more.
That's the total length. Is that correct?
Kevin Curd is the president of the New Plymouth Tramping Club, which has more than 300 members and has already taken over maintenance of the Kiri track in Egmont National Park. He's worried some of DOC's other tracks could be closed.
They are indicating to us that there is going to have to be some of these tracks closed and even the possibilities of losing huts, which is a concern to us. They cannot look after all the tracks that they've got, so they do have to make that decision. We accept that, but it does concern us that some of our people do like to go off track a little bit.
Kevin Curd says his club has balked at the idea of taking over responsibility for any of the 8 huts in the park.
We are concerned that if we do take over a hut, our present members might be keen to do that, but in 5 or 10 years' time, the members joining may feel that they don't want to look after that hut anymore and maybe feel that's DOC's responsibility.
Robin McNeil is the president of the Federation of Mountain Clubs of New Zealand, which represents 80 groups with a combined membership of 20,000. He says the Federation has helped dole out $400,000 of DOC money to groups who maintain backcountry tracks and huts.
Very, very nervous about
how far, is this a slippery slope? We don't think so at the moment, and we're pretty confident it won't. But obviously, we would not want to be looking after front country huts and tracks. That's definitely the Department of Conservation's concern, and they should be looking after those.
Robin McNeill says his members get a sense of ownership by doing the maintenance work, and DOC simply doesn't have the cash to maintain its 950 huts and 14,000 kilometre track network.
Do they spend scarce resources of money doing up a remote hut, or they try and save Kokako or Pauwili Offender? And that's a tension they've got, and they could spend an awful lot more money on biodiversity if they had more resources.
David Spears is DOC's Operations Director for the Waikato, Hauraki and Taranaki region. He says the current review is not about making savings.
We have a recreational budget. It is what it is. This is about, within that budget, making sure that we have the best range of offerings for current and future users. So it's not about saying we've got to cut a bunch of money out of the budget. It's not about that at all.
For example, David Spears says DOC actively manages 300 kilometres of track for recreational users in Egmont National Park, and the question is whether that is too much.
There are more tracks in Taranaki than are necessary, and far more than are needed to meet the needs. We're not about reducing the number of opportunities. It's more about saying, well, if we've got 5 of one kind of track, for example, do we need 5? Or is actually 2 more than enough?
David Spears says the review will take about 6 months, and it would be another year before any changes would be put in place. For Checkpoint, Robin Martin.
Let's have some sport. Last night on Checkpoint, we talked about how hard it would be for the Black Caps to beat India in their opening game at cricket's T20 World Cup. India are ranked number 1 in the world. They were at home. The crowd was as passionately noisy as basically any crowd in sport can be, and the pitch was as dead as a dodo. Well, tonight we're reflecting on the fact the Black Caps won. And remarkably, they outplayed India at their own magnificent strength, flat track bowling. The Black Caps left their most celebrated paceman, Trent Boult and Tim Southee, out. Instead, they played 3 spinners, Nathan McCullum, Mitchell Santner and Indian-born Ish Sodhi. It was audacious and triumphant. The trio snared 9 of the 10 wickets between them as the Black Caps bowled India out. Incredible. RNZ sports reporter Joe Porter caught up with Ish Sodhi after the game and asked him how it felt to be part of such an effective bowling lineup.
Mate, that was an absolutely amazing win, and I take no credit away from that. And it was definitely led by Match to the top, a world-class performer, and he started it off for us and led us believe that we could play a massive part in this game. And I feel like all of us did that. I think 9 wickets were lost to spin bowling in our innings that we bowled, and it's just a massive credit to the way that it was led by the boys up top. And it made our job easy a little bit later on when the wickets had already fallen, and we could just try to restrict as much as we could, and wickets came that way. So, it's an amazing feeling, and we definitely enjoy it now. But like I said, it's business time again in the next couple of days, so we can't really get a little bit too high because a whole new challenge awaits us in Dharamshala.
What's it like being an Indian-born spinner playing for New Zealand, being back in India and robbing the hosts of an opening match victory at the World T20?
Mate, look, it's obviously a really, really good occasion, and the atmosphere was brilliant tonight, and for us to put up a performance like that was really nice. And for me, myself, I think it was just on the back of watching Mattress and Santa go about their work in the top 6 and just trying to continue it on when I got my chance. And I'm really happy that I got the opportunity to do that, and the position that we got ourselves in is really pleasing.
India are obviously renowned as being one of the best batting sides in the world at playing spin bowling, and of course they have some of the most famous spin bowlers in the world. What does this mean for you guys in terms of your confidence being able to knock over the hosts on a spin-friendly pitch using your spinners?
Well, I think the biggest thing is this is a very, very hard-fought tournament. The group, especially our group, is a really tough group to be a part of, and for us to start the tournament off in that fashion is really good, and to lead on to our next couple of games, we will definitely take confidence. But, there's a quick turnaround now, and we've got a completely different opposition on the 18th with a completely different deck that we haven't even seen yet. So preparations start again, and we've got to enjoy this victory now, but park it pretty quick because we've got a whole new challenge awaiting us in Dharamshala.
An extraordinary performance that was by the Black Caps. That was Ish Sodhi talking to Joe Porter, our sports reporter, Joe Porter. Interesting to see Mitchell Santner saying that when he was batting, he was watching the Indian spinners really push it into the pitch and he thought he'd emulate them. Well, it worked for him really well. 3 spinners beating India in Nagpur. Quite remarkable. We've been looking at this story every night this week, and there is no resolution to it because a military panel in the Navy indecent assault case has been unable to reach a verdict. A commander has denied a charge of indecent assault at Devonport Naval Base in May 2012. A lieutenant accused him of grabbing her bottom up to 5 times while they were drinking with a group at the officers' mess at the base. Sharon Brett-Kelly is at the Naval Base. She's been at the court-martial throughout the week. Sharon, what happened today?
Well, John, after deliberating for about 4.5 hours, the military panel came back to court and said it remained deadlocked. Now, about 2 hours after they had started deliberating, these 3 military panel members, they did come back in and said that they couldn't reach a unanimous verdict, but Judge Charles Blackie sent them out again and said, give it another try and see how you go. We want a unanimous verdict. But they've come back and said no verdict. Judge Blackie said that these members didn't believe, even with more time, that they could reach a unanimous verdict, and he said it's left him with no alternative but to discharge the panel. But now it's not up to him to decide whether there would be a retrial. He'll just report this and someone else will decide. But due to the possibility of another retrial, he said that interim name suppression will continue for the commander and the lieutenant.
OK, Sharon Brett-Kelly, thank you so much. So just to update that, no verdict. They were unable to reach unanimous verdict, so the panel who are considering the case are discharged. No word yet on whether there will be a second hearing of this charge of indecent assault at the Devonport Naval Base in May 2012. And as Sharon said, interim name suppression of both the accused and the alleged victim continues. Let's go to Russia now, where military pilots have returned to a hero's welcome on their arrival home after President Vladimir Putin announced it would withdraw its military presence in Syria. This report in from Reuters.
A hero's welcome at an airbase in central Russia for pilots returning home from the aerial campaign over Syria. President Putin's announcement of a drawdown of forces from the region came as a surprise to the West, but has been welcomed by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry.
Russia's announcement yesterday that it will remove half of its forces immediately and more perhaps from Syria, and with the political negotiations reconvening this week in Geneva, we have reached a very important phase in this process.
A phase that Kerry says has a very real chance of producing peace. Moscow's move comes after 5 months of Russian airstrikes in Syria, ostensibly against Islamic State, but also shoring up Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, a key ally of Russia in the Middle East. Overall, though, hostilities between factions are at a low point. Western diplomats say Putin is likely now to focus on the Syria peace talks, adding that will put pressure on the Syrian government to negotiate and agree to peace terms.
That report in from Reuters. New Zealand Rugby has announced a loss for the 2015 year of $463,000. That's half of what had been projected. Rugby World Cup year means a substantial reduction in the number of tests the All Blacks play at home. There was no mid-year visit from the Northern Hemisphere team. This happens in June every year. This year it's Wales, for example, nothing last year. And fewer games in the Rugby Championship, just 2 at home. That's a series we play with South Africa, Australia and Argentina. So revenue through the gate down, still with TV rights and sponsorship. Overall revenue was in fact up 10% to $133 million. It's in the provinces where the loss occurred, $1.3 million deficit in the 14 Mitre 10 Cup unions. Again, the provincial competition was hurt by the attention grabbing of the Rugby World Cup. And Steve Chu told me provincial rugby is a non-negotiable. Every All Black starts there, it underpins rugby's broader community, and it simply has to work.
Yeah, well, look, I think we need, again, I put in a bit of context, and I spent a bit of time with my colleagues from other sports, and they look at us with a considerable amount of envy. You know, we do have incredibly strong revenue base. We got long-term commercial and broadcast deals locked in, so we know what's going to happen for the next 5 years. So we're able to plan and work with our provinces. But yeah, it's challenging, and the local support, the communities, the volunteers are still incredibly important to us. So while the focus today is on the money, We're also tonight releasing our 2020 strategy, which still talks a lot about volunteers, still talks a lot about the community game and what we need to do to make sure people right through the country see rugby as relevant, interesting and compelling.
The other thing is, of course, you're brand ambassadors, and that has a real impact on you because, for example, this year you're going to Chicago again because there is an attempt on to kind of proselytise in America, isn't there? Get more Americans watching the game. The way to do that is to take the best team in the world up there. Do you make money out of that?
We do. Again, it's a balanced decision. I mean, the first thing is it's got to be right for the All Blacks from a performance point of view. And we've overlaid that rule, if you like, on any decision we've made. Then we look at what we've got to do in our leadership role around the world game, and certainly the American market's important for rugby. And if the rugby market grows, we clearly want the All Blacks to be in the forefront of that. And coincidentally, we're the team most people want as well. So, it's to our advantage to be sort of pioneers in that regard. But again, we've got to come back. We've got to make sure the team is still connected here at home with Kiwis. We've got to make sure the guys can perform and recover and perform again. And we've got to make sure that we're doing the job back at community and school level. Otherwise, we won't have future All Blacks.
Steve Chu, CEO of New Zealand Rugby. I asked him about the Wellington Sevens, where they took a bit of a financial hit, and the NZRU's board, or New Zealand Rugby's board, is still deciding a future for the Sevens, what form it will be in, will it stay in Wellington, how long, how often, all of those kinds of decisions still to be made. Coming up to the 6 o'clock news, let's have a bit of escapism before we get there. It's said that a wise man invented beer, or woman, but would he or she have had it for breakfast with cereal? Well, food company Sanitarium has surveyed 1,000 people about what they eat in the morning, and it's fair to say that some of it might turn your stomach instead of kickstart your day. Or it might sound a little delicious, depending on your point of view. Our reporter Tom Furley looks at what's on the menu.
On the streets of central Auckland, it seems breakfast isn't always the once traditional cereal and milk.
Leftover pizza or pasta.
Noodle soup.
Ice cream.
We actually like to have lunch for breakfast, kind of like fish and chips, maybe a burger.
You know what kānga pita corn is? Rotten corn.
I had this potato rosti, I think, in Switzerland once, and it was made with raw egg whites instead of veal.
On-me greens with mayo.
The survey found some are inclined to eat a pie, chocolate or leftover party food from the night before, while almost a third had a hot drink for breakfast at least twice a week. But several people I spoke to took that one step further.
Coffee and a ciggy. It's when I can't be bothered eating, so I just have a coffee and a ciggy, and it sort of substitutes for food.
I just start with cigarettes and coffee actually, which is pretty standard.
One of the breakfast survey respondents even claims to start their day with beer and cereal, which didn't surprise Aucklander Laura Fepulei.
I know a few people who do that, and I find that disgusting. Yeah, or any other alcohol with it. I've actually seen them actually mix it. I had another friend actually do that. I don't know if they were still drunk from the night before, but yeah, it's pretty odd.
The beer and cereal combo didn't tickle many people's taste buds though.
You've got to be crazy.
I don't think that this is nice for breakfast. It's not a healthy food to start your day.
Definitely not. Too early in the day.
Cereal is great. No, beer is best for the night.
But Courtney Maingay says she's considering such a meal tomorrow as a bit of an Irish celebration.
I discussed this about tomorrow because it's St. Patrick's Day, so I have to start the day off, well. So beer with breakfast, but probably not in my cereal, on side. I haven't had it with cereal before. That'd be too far, I think.
A dietitian at the New Zealand Nutrition Foundation, Sarah Hanrahan, says breakfast habits have changed, but a beer-fueled start to the day isn't a good move and could definitely have consequences.
Weight gain, you could get deficiencies of other nutrients that you've thrown out. That's a time when people quite often have some milk. So you've thrown that out and had the beer instead. It's adding unnecessary calories, it's adding alcohol, it's got no nutritional value that is a benefit to your breakfast.
Just a quarter of the people surveyed said they eat only healthy breakfasts. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
Thanks, Tom, for that warning at the end about not having beer for breakfast. Leilani and I were sitting here wondering if, in fact, you were being serious. We weren't, Tom. But it was excellent for you to tell us that beer is not a nutritional way to start the day. Lots of feedback coming in on Bunnings using volunteers and making a donation for charity, and lots of it supports Bunnings. Feel cross listening to this, says one listener. Many organisations offer this opportunity for community groups to raise money, or did so in the past. Electrical companies, supermarkets. I've done this fundraise for Cubs, school and church. Easy money if you get 20 parents together. It's hard enough raising money without being politically correct about this. It's not a minimum wage. The Bunnings use of sports and service clubs is nothing new. Over 25 years ago, I was a member of Rotaract in Dunedin. As fundraisers, we did stock takes in shops such as Woolworths and Decca. My first ever job was packing the shelves after school in Decca. They were a great way for a club to raise funds, even more important nowadays. So I say, good on you, Bunnings, says Dave. Andrew says, ask the warehouse for their experience of using volunteers to stock taking. I volunteered for these several times when my children were at school, and it was a very effective way for a volunteer group to raise money. Kia ora everyone, you are listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Leilani standing by with the 6 o'clock news. After the 6 o'clock news, we are going to go back to the US. Remarkable day in which Trump won Florida. Remember, that's Rubio's home state. And Hillary Clinton seems to have had a clean sweep. We will update that after the news, so we're going to go back there. Angelina Jolie calling for governments to act on refugees. And Fiji remembers former Highlander, a wonderful midfield player, beloved by the rugby community, Serura Beni, who died quite unexpectedly yesterday. All of that and more coming up in the next 30 minutes. But first, here is the news with Leilani Mamoisia.
Kia ora, good evening. The Security Intelligence Service has revealed none of the so-called jihadi brides referred to by its director last year actually left from New Zealand. Official papers say all were New Zealand citizens who were living in Australia and left from there. Last December, the SIS Director Rebecca Kittredge told Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee there was a developing trend of New Zealand women travelling to ISIS-controlled areas. Now the SIS has clarified the status of those women, saying not one left from New Zealand, although they were New Zealand passport holders. The Minister in charge of the SIS, Chris Finlayson, denies the government deliberately created the wrong impression.
I don't know, we didn't give that impression at all. That's simply mistaken. It's wrong.
So you don't think the New
No,
Zealand
I don't think that at all.
Chris Finlayson, the Minister in charge of the SIS. A parliamentary inquiry will investigate how many people possess illegal firearms and how they're able to get them. The Police Minister, Judith Collins, earlier called for an investigation, particularly in the wake of the shooting of 4 police officers in Kawero last week. Here's our political reporter, May Heron.
Parliament's Law and Order Select Committee was unanimous in voting for an inquiry. One member, the Green Party MP David Clendon, says many gun-related tragedies have nothing to do with gangs, and it's important the investigation looks at the whole issue of illegal possession. Another, the New Zealand First MP Ron Mark, says they shouldn't canvass points already investigated. Ms Collins will look at the terms of reference and decide whether a Select Committee inquiry is enough. From Parliament, May Heron.
United States Republican frontrunner Donald Trump has swept Florida, Illinois and North Carolina and driven rival Marco Rubio out of the White House race, but is lost in the crucial state of Ohio. Ohio Governor John Kasic's victory in his home state left him as the last establishment Republican candidate standing. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas was outclassed by Trump everywhere except Missouri, where he's in a close race with the New York billionaire. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton's decisive victories in Florida, Ohio and North Carolina cast doubt on US Senator Bernie Sanders' ability to overtake her for the Democratic Party's nomination. She attacked the divisive language being used by Donald Trump.
Our next president has to bring our country together so we can all share in the promise of America. We should be breaking down barriers, not building walls. We're not going to succeed by dividing this country between us and them. And this isn't just about Donald Trump. All of us have to do our part.
Hillary Clinton. Mrs. Clinton says Mr. Trump's divisiveness would make him a poor leader. A military panel has been unable to reach a verdict in the case against a Navy commander accused of indecent assault at a court-martial at Devonport Naval Base. The panel returned to court this afternoon, saying it cannot reach a unanimous verdict after 2 hours of deliberation. The commander has denied the charge, which relates to an alleged incident at the naval base in May 2012. He's been accused by a lieutenant of grabbing her backside a number of times while they were drinking in a bar at the officers' mess. The 3-member panel was told by Judge Blackie to continue to deliberate to try to reach a unanimous verdict, but they were unable to do so. The Minister of Social Housing says it's shocking that tenants have had to have been evicted from homes in a new Christchurch housing development because they're contaminated with pee. The new housing development was completed in June last year, and of the 19 homes built, and the Minister of Social Housing, Paula Bennett, says more than 4 homes have been found to be contaminated with pee. Housing New Zealand's Chief Operating Officer Paul Commons says staff are working with the police over the evictions. Paula Bennett says the effects of the contaminated homes on children living in the homes is distressing. She says there's been a reduction in pee use over the past 4 years, due in part to Housing New Zealand's testing homes for the drug. Into sport now. The Super Rugby season is only 3 weeks old, but it's already over for All Blacks winger Nehe Milner-Skudder. Milner-Skudder requires surgery after dislocating his shoulder in the Hurricanes' win over the Blues last week and is now out for the rest of the season.
Yesterday I got the results back from the scan and did a pretty good job in there. Everything's a bit messed up, so yeah, have to go on under the knife next week, and yeah, gutted I won't be out there in the Canes jersey for the remainder of the season to be out there with the boys here, so pretty gutted at the moment.
Nehe Milner-Skudder. Meanwhile, the New Zealand Rugby Union has posted a loss of almost $500,000. The organisation's chief executive, Steve Chew, says the $463,000 for the past financial year was less than budgeted. The Black Caps spinner Ish Sodhi says the side's win over tournament favourites India at the 2020 World Cup highlights the importance of picking a side suited to local conditions. The Black Caps beat India by 47 runs in Nagpur this morning. New Zealand left out frontline pace bowlers Trent Boult and Tim Southee, opting to play 3 spinners in Sodhi, Nathan McCullum and Mitchell Santner, with the trio taking 9 of the 10 Indian wickets to fall.
Had them on the sideline, there's a bit of pressure, because they're just very good bowlers and they're obviously world-class performers and they've been doing it for a long period of time for New Zealand, and the fact that we come away with a win is a massive credit to the depth of the team. It's not just about playing, but it's about providing the best team for the surface that you're provided with, and it feels like we did that.
Ish Sodhi. In tonight's games, England play the West Indies and Bangladesh play Pakistan. And that's the news.
This Saturday morning, a certain animal theme as it turns out. Andrew Digby describes the intensive care of the kakapo. Mackenzie Crook, he was Gareth in The Office, talks about his tortoise hobby. And Amelia Dunbar and Emma Newborn have been dogged by success. Also, writer of American historical fiction Thomas Mallon. Join me, Kim Hill, Saturday morning from 8 on RNZ National.
In the Met Service weather till midnight tomorrow, Northland there's fine spells and showers, some heavy during the afternoons. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, showers, some heavy. Gisborne to Wairarapa, occasional showers easing tomorrow evening. Waikato, Waitomo and Bay of Plenty, scattered showers with possible thunderstorms. Cloudy tomorrow with isolated showers. Taranaki to Manawatu, including the central high country, occasional rain tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington, showers clearing from Wellington tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and northern Westland, rain clearing this evening, but the odd shower lingering about the Kaikoura coast until morning. Southern Westland and Fiordland is fine. Canterbury, there's drizzle clearing today but remaining cloudy and fine tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, cloud clearing and becoming fine. And Chatham Islands, rain easing to showers late afternoon and clearing overnight. And it's now 6:08.
Thank you very much indeed, Leilani. It's been a fascinating day in Super Tuesday, the third of the Super Tuesdays. Only 5 states on offer. But Florida was arguably the most important of them, and Trump has taken it off Rubio. Remember, Rubio is the senator there. Hillary Clinton for the Democrats, has a completely clean sweep. So she has taken Ohio, which was really tight, but she seems to have won it. Illinois, Missouri, Florida and North Carolina. An incredible night for her up against Bernie Sanders. Deborah Ludderbeck from Reuters has just filed this report summing up a pretty defining day in the primaries.
A night of victories for presidential frontrunners, with Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, posting early wins on the Democratic side in Florida, Ohio, and North Carolina. And Republican frontrunner Donald Trump winning big, but falling shy of a sweep, losing in Ohio to Governor John Kasich. Trump, who now faces a 3-way struggle with Kasich, as well as Texas Senator Ted Cruz, is calling for party unity.
The fact is, we have to bring our party together. We have to bring it together.
This is another Super Tuesday.
The wins for Clinton added to her lead in pledged delegates over rival Senator Bernie Sanders. And as she has after other primary wins, Clinton began to focus on a possible matchup with Trump.
To be great, we can't be small. We can't lose what made America great in the first place. And this isn't just about Donald Trump. All of us have to do our part.
With Marco Rubio losing his home state of Florida and bowing out of the race, Kasich's win in Ohio will make him the prime hope of the party's mainstream leaders, who fear Trump's rowdy campaign will lead the party to defeat in November.
The turnout is high.
And with Sanders on the Democratic side not bowing out, the race for the White House continues, even as the front runners edge ahead.
A report from Deborah Ludderbeck. Bad night for Sanders. He was expected to do well in Ohio, possibly Illinois and Missouri, but he didn't win any of the 5 states. Now, Sabrina Siddiqui is a political reporter for The Guardian newspaper, wonderful writer. I asked her if it's too early to say if the US has found its 2 presidential candidates.
I think it's increasingly looking like it's going to be Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. The Republican race is still somewhat uncertain because in Ohio, the governor there, John Kasich, pulled off not a surprise victory, but certainly an upset if you're Donald Trump. And all that it does, it makes the math a little bit more complicated for Donald Trump to actually clinch the nomination. It might be a little bit more protracted. But I think that with another big win in Florida, Donald Trump looks more and more inevitable. And Hillary Clinton also having big victories tonight, I think has finally put to rest a frustrating challenge for her campaign from Bernie Sanders.
Sabrina, is there a sense that the Democrats are starting to be pragmatic about this and displaying a kind of unity that they might not necessarily feel as people swing more and more behind Clinton? In other words, the idealism of Sanders is being sacrificed for the sort of realpolitik of Clinton?
I don't know that it's necessarily a sacrifice. I think that Bernie Sanders, although he has appealed certainly to a large swath of the Democratic Party, and he has really shaped the direction of the race, was always going to have a ceiling when you reached a certain point in the election. And to your point, I think that Democrats do still prioritize pragmatism over sheer ideology. At the same time, you do have to recall that Bernie Sanders really pushed Hillary Clinton to embrace a much more progressive Democratic agenda, whether it was on trade and other economic policy, on Wall Street, on the climate. So he certainly has had an impact here and gotten her to prioritize some issues that she may not have otherwise done without his presence. So you've kind of seen her embrace some of the central tenets of Bernie Sanders' campaign so that she can appeal to both his supporters as well as to her own base.
Sabrina, what about Rubio? He couldn't even win the state that made him senator. And this article you've just filed for The Guardian, and we so appreciate you joining us when you're still working, but it begins, Marco Rubio, the Florida senator, hailed in the aftermath of the 2012 election as the Republican Party's likely saviour. And now he's out. What went wrong?
Well, I think what Marco Rubio faced was what other candidates like Jeb Bush and what we are referring to now as the establishment or mainstream candidates, even though they are all very conservative in terms of their records, have had to confront in this election, which is deep-rooted grassroots anger that is directed toward anyone who, in this Republican Party, does not meet a new set of conservative ideals. You also have a big sense among the Republican electorate that their country is slipping away from them, that no longer resembles the America that they have known. And we know that Donald Trump has preyed on those fears. He has drawn a lot of ire toward immigrants, toward minorities. And so when you have Marco Rubio, who is pitching this optimistic future where there's a bigger tent for the Republican Party, where they reach out to minorities, where they appeal to people who have stopped voting for them in recent elections, really the polar opposite of what Donald Trump was selling, I think it was difficult for Marco Rubio to overcome this moment in the Republican Party's politics. Now, this is very dangerous, of course, for their future and the implications moving forward if they're ever to win the White House. And I think that's why he warned Marco Rubio on exiting the race, please do not give in to the politics of resentment and fear. Do not give in to the frustration. But it looks like, at least this time around, that's what they're going to do.
Sabrina, can we end with Trump? I was watching him on Fox TV, which is not something I often do, and he was live at Kansas City, and he was standing on the stage raving and looking barely rational, and I thought, my goodness, is this the turning point? Is this where things are going to fall apart? He's just won Florida. He's just won Rubio's Florida. In other words, is his irrationality at some level the embodiment of precisely the kind of anti-establishment feeling that you were just describing? Does he now look more and more like the kind of oppressed everyman, as nutty as he seems?
I think that's one of the issues that Republicans now have to confront, is Donald Trump. One of the other main reasons for his rise is people who feel as economically disenfranchised, working-class Americans who are drawn to this successful business magnate. And I think that he is very skilled at switching into a more conciliatory tone, not what you would expect given everything he has said over the course of the last year, but it shows you if he is the nominee, he can pivot to a general election. He can appeal to independents, and that's what he has been doing, to people who haven't voted even to participate in elections in a long time because that's how frustrated they were. So, what the Republican Party now faces is a challenge of, do they embrace that and do they allow him to then be the party standard bearer, or do they distance themselves from him because of, as you said, all the nutty things he has said or the offensive and controversial things he has said, because embracing him would do irreparable potentially damage to their standing among groups they will need in future elections.
Sabrina Siddiqui, who writes for The Guardian on US politics. People are saying a bit at the moment that this isn't revealing America in a great light, but if you want an example of how truly great America can be, some of the print journalism coming out of the country at the moment is remarkable. We've had Michael Tomasky from the New York Review of Books. We've had McKay from BuzzFeed. We've had, who else have we had? We've had Salon, The Nation. Some of the writing coming out of those magazines and organs has been extraordinarily good, and I suggest you do seek it out if you're despairing a bit at the moment. Let's go back to Bunnings, paying volunteers less than minimum wage to do its stock take as part of what it calls a fundraising opportunity. The company gives community groups $12.50 per person per hour to work an evening shift in its warehouse counting stock. Now, that's outraged the First Union, which represents about a quarter of Bunnings employees. The fundraising practice was revealed to Checkpoint a day after some Bunnings workers were served suspension notices for taking off their aprons as a fairly low-key dispute, objection to rostering issues. First Union spokesperson Maxine Gay joins us on the phone now. Maxine, are you there?
Yes, I am, John.
Hi, did you know about this? Did you know about this fundraising where community groups go in and do stock take and all that kind of stuff and are paid $12.50 per hour per person?
Well, I knew that they augmented their numbers from time to time with bringing in additional labour, but I had no idea until I was shown it today by your program that they were engaging in this $12.50 per hour per person. It sounds incredibly dodgy to me and sounds like just a way of actually getting this work done very, very cheaply. I've never known Bunnings in the past to not require its own workforce to actually undertake stocktake work.
Now, Maxine, we're receiving a lot of feedback from people saying, hold on a sec here. We've been stocking shelves or doing stocktake or whatever in New Zealand retail stores, and people have cited Decker and Woolworths, going back, the warehouse. They say, look, this is a really good way that community groups can raise money. I wonder, are Bunnings damned if they do and damned if they don't here?
No, if this was a genuine commitment by Bunnings to be supporting the charities, what they would be saying is, we will give you X number of dollars as a donation and you bring in people. This notion of $12.50 per hour per person, I would think that the Labour Inspectorate should be very interested in this, because this is lower than the minimum wage, because they are requiring people to be over the age of 18.
So, Maxine, so what are you saying now? That if people go in and do a stocktake or shelves packing or whatever to raise money for, and somebody used the example of Cubs, that they have to be paid the minimum wage per person there? Is that how it has to work?
Well, what I'm concerned about, and from the document that I saw today, it's individualised it. So if the charity turned up with 100 people, are they seriously saying they would pay 100 people $12.50 per hour that they're working there, or is there a set amount of money? I just think that there's some very dubious practices going on, and I'm very, very concerned that Bunnings has completely lost its moral compass. You made mention before about docking workers pay for taking off an apron, a very low-level action. People were still working. We've subsequently heard today that Bunnings is... It appears that they're going to make the suspension continuous, even though those workers were still working once they put the pennies back on. This is just crazy stuff. And now on top of it, we find them engaging in these kinds of practices, which look very, very suspicious to me.
Maxine Gay from the First Union. Thanks so much for your time, Maxine. Now, Bunnings General Manager Jackie Coombs, we have been trying to talk to Jackie since she was off-site and couldn't be interviewed today, even by phone. Jackie, we would love you to respond to all of the stuff. If you're listening, or if someone who works with Jackie is listening, please get her to call us here at RNZ in Auckland or in Wellington. You can be transferred through. We'd love to get your response. And if we can't do so tonight, Jackie, we'd love to talk to you tomorrow. Obviously, things are fairly tense between you and the union, and we'd love to discuss all of this with you. Right. Actress, or actor, I think it's just the gender-neutral term now, isn't it? Oh, God, did I sound like an old fart there? Actor and humanitarian Angelina Jolie has appealed to the world's governments to show leadership in dealing with the migrant and refugee crisis 5 years after the Syrian civil war began. Angelina Jolie visited refugees in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, 15 kilometres from the Syrian border.
So my plea today is that we need governments around the world to show leadership, to analyze the situation, to understand exactly what their countries can do, how many refugees they can assist, and how, in which particular communities, and to what time frame, to explain this to their citizens and address their fears based on not emotion, but on a measured assessment of what can and must be done to share the responsibility and to get on top of this situation.
Actor Angelina Jolie. Turkey, Jordan and Lebanon host the vast majority of the 4.8 million refugees created by the conflict. The 1 million refugees registered in Lebanon represent a quarter of the country's population. A quarter of Lebanon's population is now refugees. Actually, we're going to go to a camp after the program tonight and bring it to you tomorrow night with Save the Children. We're going to talk to some of the children in one of those camps that will be on Checkpoint tomorrow night. Coming up on World Watch PM at 6:30 with Elizabeth Brown, Donald Trump's march towards the White House claims survives another casualty. That's Rubio, of course. Elizabeth will have more on that. And 5 years to the day since a small protest sparked what has become Syria's bitter and devastating civil war. Well, Watch PM looks back at what has happened in Syria. An absolute tragedy for that country and its people. A timber exporter says China has been skirting around the free trade agreement with New Zealand ever since it was signed, and he's worried about future trade deals, leaving local businesses at a disadvantage. Tariffs were slashed when the deal was signed in 2008, but products like sawn timber that are processed before export are facing non-tariff barriers like subsidies, regulations and port charges. What's going on? Well, Teresa Cowie explains.
The Wood Council, which represents forestry and sawmilling companies, says it's getting nothing from the free trade agreement with China because Chinese authorities are finding new ways to charge them for exporting there. The executive director of Sequoia Lumber in Kawerau, David Turner, says his company's growth has taken a hit and the government needs to talk to China.
There's a fundamental misunderstanding in government is that we apply our capitalist methodologies to the world and we assume that everyone's playing by those same set of rules. But increasingly our biggest trade partners are the largest mercantilist nations. So they're always going to be focused on trying to source raw materials so that they can add value to them in their own economies and employ their own people.
David Turner says the sawmilling company is having to work around pricey regulations that are making it difficult to compete, and he's worried future trade agreements will have similar failings. And farmers and growers are reporting similar barriers. Chinese authorities have banned the importing of a smaller hairless variety of kiwi fruit known as kiwi berries. Michael Franks is the chief executive of Seekers, a kiwi berry exporter, and he says the fruit was previously allowed into China because of its similarity to kiwi fruit, but it's now been reclassified as a separate species.
It's meant that the industry's had to scramble because kiwi berry is typically a short cycle product. So we're harvesting it, processing it, packing it and flying it to the country. The exporters have had to now find another market for the volume that was intended to go to China and set up to go to China.
The chief executive of the Auckland Chamber of Commerce, Michael Barnett, says some producers are really struggling with rules intended to get around the free trade deal.
If I look at infant milk formula, we've seen behaviours there where the Chinese have ended up controlling the supply chain from New Zealand into the China market to a large degree, excluding the smaller exporters. You can also see it in the meat industry where in New Zealand we have some meat producers who are accredited by the Chinese and others who are not.
Labour's economic development spokesperson David Clark says the government appears to be doing nothing to sort it out.
Thus far, we've seen a government either unwilling to intervene or doing it in a really weak way. We need our government to be speaking with ministers in countries where the spirit of free trade agreements is being ignored.
The Trade Minister, Todd McClay, declined to be interviewed, but in a statement said the government is taking the issue very seriously. He says the Trans-Pacific Partnership will establish a framework that ensures New Zealand's trading partners resolve the issues facing exporters. For Checkpoint, Teresa Cowie.
Thanks, Teresa. We're going to end tonight with a tribute to former Fiji and Highlanders rugby player Siru Rambini, who's being remembered as a cheerful team man who was full of life. Tributes have been flowing throughout the rugby community, far and wide. Played in the UK, played in the Pacific, played in New Zealand. For the centre, who died of a heart attack aged just 37. RNZ International sports reporter Vinnie Wiley spoke to some of those who played with and against him.
Iliasa Tanivula played with Siru Rambini in the 2004 Highlanders team and says he was shocked when he heard the news.
Young fella, full of life, and I was honoured to have played with him professionally in New Zealand with the Highlanders. He was a team man. He thought of everyone around him, and he was cheerful. On the field, he loved the physicality. Been an honour and privilege to play with a man.
After leaving New Zealand, Rambini played for Leicester and Leeds in England and had spells at French clubs La Rochelle and Mont-de-Marsan before getting into coaching. He represented the Flying Fijians 30 times, playing at the 2003 and 2007 World Cups, and featured on the World 7 Series and at the 2002 Commonwealth Games. Leicester Tigers Chief Executive Simon Cohen said Rambeni was a lovely, lovely man, and anyone who saw the 2007 English Premiership final will never forget his performance that day. Hale Tipau played with Rambeni for both the Highlanders and Pacific Islanders and was assigned by the Otago Rugby Union to look after him when he first arrived in New Zealand 16 years ago. He also remembers their battles when Tonga came up against Fiji.
Interesting when you play against Seru, it was like for Fiji, because they're most all of their backs are the same. I played against him at Otago and he was someone to watch for. He was very destructive on the field, but mate, just a smile and typical Fijian that people would love to hang out with. And I saw him in Hong Kong last year during the Sevens, so we caught up there.
Hale Tipau says things were going well for Rambeni professionally. He was running a few businesses in Fiji and was due to fly back to Hong Kong this week.
We were there yesterday when we got the news of his passing. So I caught up with a couple of rugby Fijian legends I played with. And then we had a bowl of kava and talked about Seru and went over and saw him last night at the hospital.
Tributes have also been flowing on social media from around the world. Former Australia winger Lote Tingeri, who was born in Fiji, tweeted that Rambeni was a great man taken way too young. Former Samoa international Eliota Fuimaonu Sapolu labelled him one of the Pacific greats, while former England first five Johnny Wilkinson said what a player and a team man. The Pacific Island Players Association says their Fijian representative will find out some details so that they can sit down and see how they can assist Rambeni's family going forward. Seru Rambeni is survived by his two children and his wife.
RNZ International's Vinnie Wiley. Ending the programme on a very sad night tonight. Eliota Fuimaono Sapolo described hating every minute playing against Seru. You constantly smashing and stepping me, one of the Pacific's greats. That's the end of Checkpoint for this evening. Thank you for listening. We'll be back again at 5 o'clock tomorrow night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Security Intelligence Service has revealed all the so-called jihadi brides referred to by its director last year actually left from Australia, not New Zealand. A parliamentary inquiry will investigate how many people possess illegal firearms and how they're able to get them. A military panel has been unable to reach a verdict in the case against a Navy commander accused of indecent assault. And a union says it's outrageous that community groups are being offered less than the minimum wage to run Bunnings stock takes. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm Elizabeth Brown. Tonight, another Republican candidate throws in the towel, a look back at 5 years of war in Syria, and tracking the Wimbledon prowler. Those stories and more